You're watching the Rainbow Lotus News. We have a bombshell move by this Department of Justice that is just the absolute peak of lawlessness. Can you explain what just happened? The Trump administration and his dirty DOJ leadership is trying to use the criminal justice system to erase American history. They have now filed motions to dismiss, to just completely get rid of, wipe off the books the criminal convictions of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, some of whom were convicted of seditious conspiracy, a conspiracy to try to overthrow the United States government. You know, I sat in those courtrooms and covered both the Oath Keepers trials and the Proud Boys trial. I know many of the prosecutors. Some of them were my homicide prosecutors. Some of them I tried their first murder cases with. These people worked for years to bring justice to the American people for the attack that Donald Trump launched on the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, to try to steal an election, to try to undermine the expressed will of the American voters, and in a very real sense, try to, if not end democracy, bring it to a screeching halt. And now they want to take the last step, Donald Trump's dirty, corrupt DOJ leadership, and try to dismiss these cases that are long over, wipe them off the books. Not technically expunge them, but that is in substance what they're trying to do, make them disappear from history. Of course, we will remember, the history books will remember, and then when these people get voted out of power, they're going to be held accountable for the horrific corruption they are perpetrating, against the American people day in and day out. But right now, the motion has been filed in both cases to have them have these convictions, have these cases returned from the appeals court that back down to the trial court judge, and they are seeking to have them dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can never be rebrought again in the future. And they are arguing to the judges that they should be dismissed, quote, in the interests of justice with no more meat on the argument bone than that. This is as searing an injustice as I could ever conjure up. I don't think I could come up with this in my wildest imagination. Does a judge have discretion here to be able to say there is no world in which this would advance the notion of justice, and so I'm going to prevent you from doing this? Or are they just kind of there to follow the directives of the DOJ, since the DOJ was the entity that prosecuted them in the first place? The judges have discretion, but not much. When the prosecution files a motion to dismiss the federal rules of criminal procedure, say the case can be dismissed with leave of court, that means the judge literally has to grant the motion to dismiss. That's what the phrase "with leave of court" means. The challenge becomes, and we have seen these exact circumstances before, after Mike Flynn, I'm sure everybody remembers him, one of Donald Trump's cruddy associates, lied to the FBI and pleaded guilty not once but twice. Trump had his DOJ go in and move to dismiss Mike Flynn's case, including his guilty plea, and the Judge EMTT Sullivan, had to fight the with leave of court battle. He did not want to dismiss a case in which Mike Flynn had pleaded guilty. But at the end of the day, judges have relatively little discretion, little leeway, little legal wiggle room, because it's not as if they can just pluck an independent prosecutor out of thin air and say, "Okay, the Department of Justice doesn't want to prosecute this case. I'll get my own prosecutor to move forward in the interests of justice on behalf of the American people." Judges don't have that option, with some very limited exceptions, like if you're dealing with a contempt of court charge, then a judge does have some leeway to put an independent prosecutor in there to vindicate. The court being victimized by having its orders disobeyed and disregarded. So these battles have been fought in recent history, primarily in the Trump administration. The same thing happened up in New York, when Donald Trump's DOJ wanted to dismiss a public corruption case against then New York Mayor Eric Adams, not because he didn't commit the crimes, but because they wanted Eric Adams to be in a position to do political favors for Donald Trump. That is a blatantly unethical reason to dismiss a case against a criminal defendant. And the presiding judge in that case, Judge Dale, didn't want to do it, and he had to decide whether he had to grant the motion to dismiss. He actually did appoint an independent counsel to brief up and argue the issue, but at the end of the day, Judge Ho decided he had nowhere to go but to dismiss the case against Eric Adams, although he dismissed it without prejudice when Donald Trump's DOJ wanted it dismissed without prejudice. That was little consolation there. So, we've seen this movie before, and it almost always has a sad ending. The case ends up being dismissed. And there is no mistaking that a dismissal of these seditious conspiracy charges and other convictions against the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers is not in the interests of justice. It actually is a searing injustice that violates everything that the American people hold dear. Why is this a priority for the Department of Justice, given the fact that, these people were already convicted and then they were part of Donald Trump's broad-ranging pardons and commutations that he signed right after he took office? And so it's not like these people are currently rotting away in a cell, and so what benefit do they derive? And does the Department of Justice derive by going through with this exercise that feels largely symbolic? I'm going to draw some reasonable inferences here because I don't know what is driving this decision. But the inference that I draw based on what we do know is one: they want to continue to prop up the lie that the election was stolen, was rigged, was fraudulent, and Donald Trump really won an election we all know and the evidence shows he lost. And this is yet another, brick that they're taking out of the wall to deconstruct the truth about what happened in that election. And two, I think this is a recruiting tool for the upcoming midterms. And the signal is, if you go out, you go to the polling places and you do violence in my name and for my benefit, says Donald Trump. I've got your back. I'll commute your sentence. First of all, now that he has control of the Department of Justice, it is Donald Trump's Department of Justice. Now you need only look at, his big ugly mug hanging limply off the building itself, DOJ. He is sending the signal, first of all, my prosecutors won't touch you if you commit offences in my name. 2, if you do get convicted, I will commute your sentence or fully pardon you. And 3, on the unlikely chance you end up being convicted, I've got you. I will file a motion to dismiss your conviction, even long after your case is over. This is a recruiting tool, I think, for Donald Trump to rally his dirty troops for the upcoming midterms. Last question here. I know that even off camera, you and I had spoken about this move by Donald Trump, and obviously all of this stuff impacts both of us. It's why we do this series. But I was struck by how personally you had taken this move in particular. Can you speak a little bit about why? I didn't even want to talk about this development now. I can't not talk about, what I see as a searing injustice that needs to be remedied, by any means necessary, as long as those means are peaceful in the future. But I know these prosecutors personally. I've worked with them. I've stood shoulder to shoulder with some of them in courtrooms trying cases. I supervised several of them when I was chief of the homicide section at the DC U.S. Attorney's Office. I know the work that went into these convictions, and these are some of the most consequential convictions in the interest of American democracy. So I mean to say that I take this personal, is an understatement. I take it so personally that I was so enraged when I saw it that I temporarily just wanted to shut down. I wanted to turn away. And I think you sensed that when we talked an hour or so ago, but it's too important not to keep in the public square so people will see what's going on here. This is Orwellian. This is, up is down, night is day, injustice is justice, war is peace, falsity is truth. And people need to keep their eye on this bouncing ball of corruption, because there will come a time, and this is what I hold fast to, when the rule of law will come back into the light of day, and then we have to go on the accountability mission in a way we have failed to do in the past, whether it was Richard Nixon failing to hold him accountable, Donald Trump failing to hold him accountable, and then pardoning the 500-plus people that attacked the Capitol in his name to try to overthrow an American election. We can't drop the accountability ball again, because if we do, I don't think we get to keep our republic. And look, I also think it's important to note, and I cover this stuff on a daily basis, and I know that sometimes politics could feel like it's content, or can feel like it's, this stuff has been so ESPNified, so-gified. And I think the way that we're hearing discuss all of this stuff shows that it's deeply personal. It chips away at all of us on a daily basis, and I feel like I can speak on his behalf in saying that, like, it's still important, even when you see instances where it's especially difficult, especially personal, to keep doing the work of letting people know what's going on so that they can stay informed, stay engaged, and recognise what it is that we have to fight back against.